All right, looks like that is 11. Let's get started. Thank you for being here today. On behalf of Smart Dolphins, I'd like to welcome you to today's SharePoint and Teams training event. Before jumping in, I'd like to share some information on our upcoming training events. So it looks like we have on July 18th, a Microsoft Teams meetings, a what's new session. Teams is always evolving, and you may have noticed that there's sort of a new Teams that has been pushed out by Microsoft as well, which you likely have by this point. So good session to join and learn about those new features. We also have a Copilot in Microsoft Excel and Outlook session on July 25th. If you want to learn a bit more about harnessing Copilot and how that can save you time and automate tasks, very, very cool AI technology. As always, please do visit our website to register for those events and check out other upcoming events that we have always being added. If you have any questions during today's session, feel free to type them into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them as we go along. If it's something that's maybe not quite on topic, we'll probably save that toward the end, but we do have some Q&A time to make sure that we do get to all of your questions. Also, keep an eye on the chat for a handout which you can download to follow along with our session today. All right, with all of that covered, I'd now like to introduce Jolynn, our trainer for today's session. It's a great pleasure to welcome Jolynn Reen. Jolynn stands out as a Microsoft Master Trainer and Instructor, having over 30 years of experience. Thank you for joining us today, Jolynn. Please take it away.
Thank you, Ty. Appreciate it. So welcome everybody to the SharePoint session here today. The handout, as Ty said, is available in the chat if you want to go ahead and get that downloaded. That will be helpful for you to kind of know the topics and be able to use it to follow along. But it's also going to be a great resource for you for after we get done with the session as well. So I wanted to start out kind of talking more on the SharePoint side and starting with a SharePoint intranet. An intranet is, and by the way, just on SharePoint itself, SharePoint is an application, part of your Microsoft 365, that allows you, whoever in your organization that has rights to anyway, allows you to build it's like a website. So SharePoint and a website have very similar aspects to them, and you're going to see some of those, of course, here today. But one of the big things is to remember that they're both based on a URL. So it's a web address that you physically are going to access your company website and or your SharePoint intranet. An intranet is a place where within your organization, employees can visit this intranet site that will have all of your company information. A lot of times it's going to be built based on what is referred to as a hub. So we create a SharePoint site, turn it into a hub. And as you can see based on the diagram on my screen, the hub is kind of the central point to a bunch of what are referred to as sub-sites, depending on how it's structured. So these other sites connect to the hub for navigational purposes, permission level purposes, etc. But you could think of the hub as being the name of your company. And then all of these other sites that are connected to the hub can be your different departments. They could be your sub-organization. So I know some companies own multiple companies. So it could be another site for another company that you have, or just departments or divisions within your organization. And each of those individual sites, whether it's an HR, an IT, an accounting, marketing site, whatever the case would be, you have the capability of having each of those have their own set of permissions, and we can build more sites off of that site, and we can build pages off of those sites, just like we do when we develop a website. So your company website is set up very, very similar to that same structure, where we click on a link to take us to another page and or to another site. So very similar to how your company website is organized. We want to have things like a company SharePoint intranet to be able to communicate with everybody that has rights to be within the site. And by the way, there's different levels of rights that can be given to people. Most of the time, when we talk about the SharePoint sites, whether it's the hub or the other sites, we don't always have everybody in our company able to create these sites. A lot of times we have specific people, whether you're a champion or an admin, they're the ones that would create the site. And then a lot of times it's the champion within your organization that is going to do the design. And we're going to talk about those elements that very briefly, but talk about those elements that do go into the design because it's important to understand that. But when we talk about using a SharePoint site, when we create a site, there's basically two choices when we go to create it. We're going to choose if we want it to be a team site or if we want it to be a communication site. Normally, for me, 99% of the intranets that I work with, the hub is a communication site. So when we choose to create it, we create it based on a template on communication. There is a difference between a communication site and a team site. And I'm showing you on my slide a couple of check boxes as to this is what's included with this is what's included with this. You're going to see the difference between those here in just a second. But when you create a communication site, the word communication is the key because that really means that this is going to be a site that we're going to communicate information. We can display things like a company calendar, uh, department locations, contact information. We can have links to go into other company sites like the HR department, etc. It's going to be where we're going to provide information that people want to have access to. Very different than a team site. A team site is usually going to be a department site. So we can have the marketing department having a team site so that when they go to that team site, they will automatically have certain aspects built within that SharePoint site. It will come with certain things that we don't get in a communication site because a team site is built for collaboration, where the team is going to work together to collaborate. Both types of sites can have document libraries and other like calendars and quick access to other locations. They can both have pages off of them. But you want to be able to understand the difference between those. So if you need a new site created, one of the first things you're going to do during planning is choose, is it going to be communication or is it going to be a team site? Now, of course, we're going to see the difference between these and talk a lot further on the difference between communication and Teams and Microsoft Teams to go along with all of this, because they are directly connected to each other, even if it's a communication site, even if it's a team site. So you're going to see how things automatically happen when these are created. It's actually pretty cool what happens when a site is created and what we can do with a site. So kind of the questions that I get asked a lot is, should I create a team site or should it be a communication site? So in your handout, you're going to see further information as to, which one should I be using? The key to that is going to be, is this going to be available for, just sharing information and not really interaction? It's most likely going to be communication. Otherwise, if you want people to have a team site, they are going to have automatically not only a shared document library, which comes by default with all SharePoint sites, but they're automatically going to have a OneNote notebook. They're going to have a planner, and they're going to have direct connection to Microsoft Teams. Now, can't a communication site also have access to Teams? The answer is yes. but we don't get automatic features with it. So I'll show you the difference between that. It'll make more sense. So let me show you an example first of what it would look like for an intranet site. So this is just a test site that I have built, not truly set up perfectly or anything like that, because before you ever have a site created, whether you're creating it or somebody else is creating it, you need to do some planning. And I just want to share this Word document with you. This is similar to what I use when I help clients of mine create sites. We go through a planning process first. I'm very big into planning. Even if it's a team I'm creating in Microsoft Teams, I'm a huge planner. So I plan for what is the objective of the site? What type of site is it going to be? Communication or team site? What's going to be the name of the site? And they all need to be unique. And then is it going to be connected to a hub? So this, even if it's going to be a hub site, it starts as a communication site. Then it gets turned into a hub. Then we can connect other sites to that hub, just so you're kind of getting that picture. Then I need to make a list of who's going to need access. So who are the names of the people that need access to the site? What department are they in? What permission levels should they have? And we can have permission levels all the way down to a document library where we're going to store and share files, which can be done in both a communication and a team site. But we need to know who needs rights to which ones, because usually there's going to be multiples. And then we need to think about what web parts are going to be a part of that site. We have news and announcement that can be placed on the site that people can see. There can be events, there can be images, text information, contact information where we can have direct links to communicate with people. We can put in policies and procedures, all kinds of things. So we need to kind of plan what it needs to be there so that when the champion who or whoever designs it and actually creates the site, they know what is going to go in it. Not that we can't change our minds later, you definitely will. And we change kind of on a regular basis because there's maintenance that we have to think about as well. But we need to kind of think about, do we need other pages? Does this site need a sub-site? Like, am I going to have an HR department site connected to the hub, but then I want a separate HR employees site where only the employees have access, or the HR department, everybody in the company can go to. And that might actually be a communication site because we want to give them policies, we want to give them procedures, let them know what the company holidays are, those types of things. But then the employee site can actually be a site that is for collaborating just for the employees, and that could actually be a team site. So the hierarchy of how these are built is important with the users and the permission rights. But anyway, this is just a brief example of how you need to kind of really plan before you build. So let me go ahead and minimize that back down and talk about this communication site. So this happens to be a generic intranet. It's got a logo up at the top left. It's got the name of it, which I just called our intranet. It has links going across the top to other sites that are connected to the hub. I have this menu across the top for accessing different information within that site. So if we want to go into different departments, I can have a menu for those departments. I can have company orders, which takes us directly into a document library or a list. You know, we can have links to that type of information. I can have a form that it takes us into for vacation requests, whatever it is that we need. In a communication site, the navigation by default goes across the top and is fully customizable. Also, we have different web parts. So in a site, whether it's a team site or a communication site, they're set up based on sections, and each section can have multiple items included in it, and we call them web parts. So this happens to be what is called a hero web part, where it has images with links to get into other areas. So as I scroll down, I could have company news, I could have a calendar of events coming up, I could have access to a document library, all different kinds of things can be added. I'll go into a little bit more on that here in a little bit. But let me show you an example of a team site. If I go to this, at the very top is one of my subsites called Clinic Department. If I open the Clinic Department, this is another SharePoint site, but it's a team site. Notice it has a different image at the top left for the logo for this. It says the name of it, and you can even see the team's icon. So this was created in SharePoint as a site and then connected to the hub so that it's part of the intranet, but it's connected to Microsoft Teams directly. The navigation by default is on the left-hand side, but the site itself can have the same web parts. It happens to have a countdown to a blood drive, which we've already missed the blood drive because the days and hours and minutes are zero. I can have access to a hero with images and links to different things. I can have upcoming events. We can have document libraries. We can have text. We can have quick links to different contacts where we can automatically email or chat with somebody directly from these contacts, which are all web parts. So this can look similar to the communication site where we can have the same types of web parts. What's different is what we get by default on the left-hand side. With a team site, by default, you will be getting a task list. If I click this link on the left called task list, which is what it gives it by default, generic name, it's going to come up to an actual Microsoft Planner, which can be shared by everybody that is an owner, a member, or an external guest of this team site. So whoever has rights to the site has rights to this shared planner. Also, by default, you're going to see there's a notebook. If I click notebook, it's going to open Microsoft OneNote, I almost said OneDrive, OneNote, to give us a shared notebook for everybody that is a part of that team site. So just so you're seeing what happens by default with this, I'm just going to click the back arrow to go back to the site again, that clinic site. So you're going to notice on the left-hand side, there's several things that I have listed. Some of these came by default. Otherwise, we can add other apps to be connected. Whether it's a communication site or a team site, we can have other things connected, like multiple document libraries, multiple lists. We can even have a recycle bin that is available for each separate site. So every site, if something gets deleted, they have their own recycle bin. We can then go to the recycle bin to restore anything that had been deleted. It keeps it in there for the set amount of time. 93 days, I think, is the default, but we usually change that to whatever the company needs. But just so you can see, there's even conversations that come by default. If I click conversations, it physically is taking me to Outlook. The reason that it took me to Outlook is because when the team site was created, it created a group, a Microsoft group. We can talk about groups in more detail in a different session, but basically each group has their own email address, their own shared calendar, etc. So when we talk about that communication link, it assumes we want to communicate via email. So it takes you to Outlook email for that group. So you can see it's got the clinic and it says public group. Anyway, I'm going to click the back, or I'll actually just go to back to the website here, the clinic team site. So how is this connected to Microsoft Teams, knowing that this is a SharePoint team site? Let me take you into Microsoft Teams. So this is a list of all of the teams I personally have available in Microsoft Teams. Notice there's the one here called Clinic. Notice the image matches the SharePoint site. If I click Clinic, By default, with every team, regardless if it was created in SharePoint or if it was created here directly in Teams, it always has a general channel. But I added a channel through Teams called vaccinations. On this vaccinations tab, on the top where my tabs are, which are technically your apps, I have a files tab where we can share files. So I can be accessing the SharePoint information directly through Microsoft Teams. Because to be honest, I live and breathe in Teams. So if I want to have access to my SharePoint, but I'm in Teams, I can do that. And I get all the other Teams capabilities. So when I look at the tabs going across for this channel called vaccinations, I have clinic SharePoint site. If I click on it, it's opening the actual SharePoint site for the clinic. So I created that as a tab. I also have legal docs. Legal Docs is a tab that automatically is opening up the document library coming directly from the SharePoint site. Just so you're seeing the connectivity that we have from SharePoint to Teams, Teams to SharePoint. So I started in SharePoint, created the site, and when I created it, I told the computer I wanted it to be a team site. Let me back up on that for a minute. Now that you've kind of seen both a communication and a team site, if I go back to the internet and I go to SharePoint Administration Center, so I'm in the admin area of Microsoft SharePoint, I'm going to go to the left-hand side and click Active Sites. This is going to show me a list of every SharePoint site within my domain. If I go to create a new SharePoint site, so this is kind of where that planning starts. When I click create, I'm going to choose from either doing a team site or a communication site. It gives you information about how to decide which site, type of site you should create. Up at the top, you even have links to learn more about team sites versus communication sites. So I really think that they designed this very well to help make that determination. But just so you see, if I click team site, it's going to automatically give me a standard team, like a blank one. Otherwise, I can start with one of the templates. So depending on the type of team site I'm creating, and by the way, they keep adding more templates to these. So if you're going to be creating a new one that is going to store, it's for store collaboration because you have a retail store, there's a template for that, or employee onboarding, crisis communication team, IT help desk, project management, whatever your purpose, you could start with a template. So as an example, I'm just going to do an employee onboarding team. You then need to see on the left-hand side, this is the site capabilities, and this is what's going to be included. So if you choose a template, it's automatically going to give you certain entities already created. A home page, 3 additional pages, 1 SharePoint list, and a page template. I can preview the site before I create it if I want. Otherwise, I can go to the right-hand side and say use template. Then I'm going to give it a name. And so I'm just going to say that this is going to be ABC employee onboard new hires as an example. I could put in a description, which to be honest, I usually do. It's the objective of the site. So when I planned and wrote out my objective, I basically copy and paste that into the description. It's going to have a group email by default. I'm going to leave that. It's showing me what the site address is going to be. And then I can choose who's going to be the group owner. So who's going to be the owner of this? I'm going to choose myself and click next. Once you have that, so that's part of kind of thinking about the planning. I'm going to leave all the defaults and say create site. Then it's going to create the SharePoint site. So if I'm an admin and I created this, I then would give the link to the site or give permissions to the other people that are going to manage it, who's going to build it, go through the design process, etc. If I wanted to add members right now, I can. They will, of course, give, by default, they'll be a member if they're part of my domain. So it's applying the template. Once it's done, I'll click finish, and I will have this new SharePoint site. So that SharePoint site is now added to my list. So I would be able to then go open it, and I called it ABC onboarding new hires. I got a lot of those similar. I'm going to go ahead and click on it so you can see these are all the details for it. If I want to open it, I can click on the URL link and it will automatically open it so that I can start designing it. So this is kind of where the champion takes over and does the design. The admin usually doesn't, but somebody else does. I'm going to close this next steps on the right-hand side, but I just wanted you to see what happens by default if you use a template. It's a great way to get started. You can modify it, change things around, do whatever you need. But look at the left-hand side. What did it give us automatically? It gave us an onboarding checklist. So if I click on that, this is what it gave us. It is a SharePoint list. I have this training folder, or this training tab. This is one of the pages that it automatically created. Also, how we work is another page. So those can be changed. We can change the name, change the content, etc. Meet the team is the last page that we have. So we can be putting in information about people within this department. The documents is the document library that we get by default. You can, of course, create multiple document libraries, multiple lists, etc. At the top, you're going to see where it says new. If I choose new, I can create all these new items. So I can add in anything that is on my list based on my availability. So anyway, just so you're kind of seeing that that's what I got by default. But I can take any of the sites that I've created and connect to the hub. So if I have a hub site, I can automatically be connected to those hubs. But you can see any of these that are have the icon in this Teams column. These are all SharePoint teams. And I'm going to point out a couple of these. I have one called virtual training. I have one called marketing department. I'm going to scroll up here a little bit. I've got one called IT department. Here's healthcare. These are all team sites, including clinic. But here's the one I want to focus on, and it's called accounting department. The reason I'm focusing on this is it's showing up under my active SharePoint sites, but it's a team site. And just so you know, it was actually built in Microsoft Teams. So if I go back to the app Microsoft Teams, on the list of my teams, here's the accounting department team. The accounting department team has the general channel, of course, by default. I created other channels like this accounts payable. But the thing about this is every time whoever creates a brand new team directly in Microsoft Teams, it creates a SharePoint site. So a SharePoint site is created every time a new team is created. So let me take you a little bit further on understanding that connectivity between SharePoint and Teams. When I am in a channel through a team, I have my tabs going across the top. By default, you get a Files tab. The Files tab is always a document library. So when a team is created through Teams, it creates a SharePoint site. The Files tab is the default document library for that SharePoint site. When you come in, you can see up at the top on the menu, there's a choice here called Open in SharePoint. If I click Open in SharePoint, it takes me directly to the document library on the SharePoint site. So you can see it's got the URL up at the top. On the left-hand side, I have all of the same navigation options that a typical SharePoint team site would have. But when you're looking at this document library, it's exactly the same as what I had in Teams, but I have the full capability of being in SharePoint from here. So what that basically means is if I go to a file and do a right click, I have all of the SharePoint capabilities, like automate. I can request sign off. I have version history. I have alert me. Under the more category, I can check the file out. I can create workflows, etc. I don't see all of those choices when I'm back in Microsoft Teams. Or even if I'm in OneDrive, OneDrive doesn't give me that full capability that SharePoint does. So SharePoint is going to give you the most choices to help you manage your files, then Teams, then OneDrive. So just so you kind of have that understanding. But all of these, regardless of the document library, if I'm looking at it in SharePoint or I'm looking at it in Microsoft Teams, they can all be accessed in OneDrive. By utilizing this add shortcut to OneDrive, then I can open and use these files directly within OneDrive as well. So I could either open the SharePoint site, open Teams, or I can actually open OneDrive and have access to the document libraries. That's pretty cool. So we don't have just one place to go. We can be anywhere we want to be and still have access to everything. But the thing that I love the most about all of this is regardless of if I created it, the site through SharePoint and said I wanted it to be a team site, or I create it through Microsoft Teams, it automatically creates a SharePoint site. It can be connected to a hub. I can then access it through Teams or through SharePoint. So if I click the home on the left-hand side, which just to remind you, I started in Teams. This was created directly in Microsoft Teams, but I opened the document library, which opened the SharePoint site. If I go to home, this is the site itself. You can have your champion or whoever is responsible for maintaining this site, your entire team can collaborate and have access to whatever you need on this site because it is a SharePoint site. It's shocking how interchangeable everything can be these days with all of our 365. So if you go in to a SharePoint site from Teams and you go to the home, this is the site itself. If you have rights to modify it, if you've been given rights to edit, you would see the edit icon at the top right. I'm going to go ahead and click edit because that takes me into editing this site, where as you can see, it has all these different, and so just to kind of start at the top left, there's a plus sign, and that's to add a new section. Sections are going to include what we call web parts. And so when you think about collaborating with your team of people, what does your team need to have access to that we can't necessarily see very easily in Teams, that we might want to have SharePoint to make it easier? We can have quick links, which is one of the web parts. We could have quick access to document libraries right here from the home page. On this right-hand side, I just have a news web part. This is an activity web part. So you can see it's got different links to different information. And I can continue to add sections and add web parts so that our team can really collaborate together with whatever it is that we need. But how do we know what even is available to even determine what do we need? What are our choices? Well, in your handout, and kind of jumping down to the section of SharePoint Designer, which is starting in your handout on page 7. So this I'm in Designer right now because I can edit the contents. So we want to understand what our users, so everybody that's a member of this team, what do they need to see? We want to have easy navigation. That's key to all SharePoint sites. We want to be able to search the site to find whatever it is that we need to find. We want to customize the user interface so that it's related and everybody knows I'm in this team site. And this was related to the accounting department. Just so we keep that in the back of our minds, everything that goes into this site should be directly related to the accounting department. And on page 8 of your handout, I talk about planning before you build. So think about the sites, think about the pages, think about the web parts, think about what document libraries or Microsoft lists, Microsoft forms, whatever it is that you might be needing. The intranet landing pages that it's talking about at the bottom of page 8, when we talk about an intranet, when I was in the intranet, and let me jump back to that intranet here real quick. So this was the intranet landing page. What needs to be done on this landing page? What do people need to see and have quick access to right away? So I gave a few suggestions on there. But then from there, you can, of course, have different pages, like the template that I created that had different pages to it. I can always add more pages as needed or delete pages if we no longer need them. But when it comes to the sections and working with the web parts, regardless if it's SharePoint or if it's coming from Microsoft Teams into the SharePoint site, they both have the same types of web parts. So starting on page 9, it gives you instructions on adding and working with sections. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. I'm going to go back up towards the top of this page, and I'm going to go to the top left and click on Add Section. I can choose how many columns I want and what size I want each column. I'm going to say I just want 2 columns. So now I have this section that is split into 2. What you do is you put web parts in each of these sides of the section. So as I go to each of these sections, I can add things to it. But on the left-hand side, you're going to see that I have edit, I have move, I can duplicate a section, or I can delete it. So I get tools that are directly related to working with those. If I go to either side and hesitate at the top, I'm going to get this plus sign at the top of either side of this section. If I click the plus sign, that's going to show me all of the web parts that are available. I do have the web part information in your handout as well. First, it talks about sections, and on page 11, it talks about web parts. I won't spend too much time on what all these choices are, but as you start looking through these different categories of the web parts, this is going to let you know what is available that we can be using for collaborating with our team, or what communication things need to be available on a communication site. So there's text and media and content, where we could have a button that somebody clicks on and it performs an action. We could have a divider where we're going to separate things. We can add an image, a hero, etc. We have all these different tools that we can use. We also, and I can just add text as well. So if I want to have a paragraph describing, welcome to the accounting department, SharePoint site, blah, 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 I could have that included. And I might have a picture of our accounting department, whether it's going to be the employees or it's going to be a picture of the building our department is in, just kind of some user-friendly things that people can see right away. So just to give you an idea, I'm going to click text. So it automatically gave me a text box, and you always get additional tools depending on the web part you're adding in. So maybe I want to say, welcome to the accounting department SharePoint site. This is where we can share information, blah, blah, blah. I would put in all the details as to letting people know what this is for, what's the objective of this site. And I'm going to go to the left-hand side of this section, and I'm going to add in an image. So if I go to these, I could have a gallery so they could scroll through different images, but I'll just choose one image. Then I can go out to either my computer, or I could be going out to the web, and I can find an image that I want to bring in. I can upload from my computer. I could go to a link. There's so many different choices on exactly, what do you want to bring in? So I'll just add an image just so you can see that I can add an image. I just picked a canoe for right now, but because that was a recent thing that I was working on. When I'm done at the bottom right, I just click add image. So whatever is going to be helpful for your team members to see and have access to, this is what you want to be putting in the different sections. If I wanted to add more information to either of my sides of my section, you could have more than one web part on each column. I could always go back and change it to be 3 columns or whatever as well. But just to kind of show you some of the other web parts that are available, I could go to the category called document lists and libraries, where I could add in another document library or link to an existing one. I also have feeds where we could have conversation feeds. We could have feeds that are connected to Viva connections. I can have a countdown timer. So if we're going to be doing a blood drive or we're going to go live with the new software and we want to have a countdown to that taking place, these are the types of things that we can add in. Calendars and events and news are very common. So if I add in group calendar, this is going to give us a calendar that we can maintain with all the things coming up that are available for the accounting department. Not as easy to do in Microsoft Teams. This is more of a website look than Teams. You go to an app to click on at the top. Can we have apps here? Absolutely. It really just depends on what it is that you need. So anyway, as you are seeing all of this, I can continue to add in all these different web parts and change them as needed and update the calendar, update the events, etc. But when I'm done, I could either save it as a draft, or if I'm ready to go live with it, I can go to the top right and click republish so that the changes that I made are available to everybody that is an owner, member, or a guest of that SharePoint. So it automatically will have this available to anybody that comes in. So if I go back to Microsoft Teams, which is where I physically started with going into this accounting department, I can have a shortcut to get to that SharePoint site by adding a new tab in a channel is one way. So if I go to the general channel, click the plus sign to add a new tab, I can choose what type of app I want to be connecting to. I'm going to click see all. I can see that these are all of them that I have rights to, including this icon called SharePoint. And just to show you, I'll click on that one so that you can see what that gives me. But it's going to show me recommended, or I can actually have any SharePoint site that I could copy and paste the link. So if I have a URL, because every SharePoint site has a URL, just like a normal web page, I could actually, so I'm on the home page of it right now. If I go to my website or my internet browser, click on the address bar and copy that in Teams, then I could actually paste it, but this is the same site. But then I click save and it's going to automatically give us access to the SharePoint site directly in the team, which is usually what I do to make it easy and interactive for my team members. So I don't have to leave Teams to have access to my SharePoint site. So I can have all of the, and if I want to add in news information, I want to go to a link that we have set up that takes me to a different physical location. I can have access to the document libraries, whatever it is that we put in, we can have access to it directly here through Microsoft Teams. So SharePoint is the foundation of regular SharePoint sites, but it's also a foundation for a team when a team is built. So if you are in Microsoft Teams and if you have the rights to create a new team, so I'm in Teams and at the top, of the middle pane, I'm going to click the plus sign to create or join a team, and I'm going to choose create team, just so you can see that flow of how this works. You would give the team a name. So maybe I want this to be related to my commercial, oops, well, I'll just leave it as that, commercial credit. Doesn't like my word commercial. Come on. Oh, I'll just leave it. If I wanted to put in a description, I could put in a description. I'm going to go ahead and click create. It automatically, of course, will create the team, but it wants to know if I want any members with that team as well. So I can always come and add members later. To be honest, I don't usually add members when I create the team because they will get an email letting them know that they've been added. Whether I add them to a SharePoint site or I add them to a team, they get notified in Outlook. So we have that direct connection with Outlook as well. So I'm not going to add anybody in. I'm going to click skip because the only people that I would add at that point would be any other owners to help me build it, because I want to build the site before I invite people to join it. So I have this new team site called Commercial Credit. On the general channel that you get by default, you of course have the post tab, and I have this files tab. Right away, you're going to see open in SharePoint when I go to the files tab. So it automatically created a SharePoint site immediately when I created that team. So you're seeing that connection that we have, creating a SharePoint site, choosing it to be a team site, or creating a team in Microsoft Teams and then accessing the SharePoint. So either way, we can have a SharePoint site. I love that it works this way, that they are that connected, because SharePoint is very powerful and can be such a great place for your team to be able to collaborate and share information by having the document libraries, by having access to SharePoint list, Microsoft Forms. All of your Microsoft apps along with workflows can be done through Teams or directly in SharePoint. It is, to me, the best thing that Microsoft has ever done since the beginning of Microsoft. I remember back when I used to do training on Microsoft Works. Yes, I'm that old. I was in IT before the mouse came out. To me, the way SharePoint first came out was difficult. You needed to be an engineer to figure it out. Now, with the connectivity that we have with all of 365 and Copilot capabilities, it is unbelievable. But as you can see on the left-hand side, when I came into this commercial credit team SharePoint site, I have conversations on the left-hand side, which once again would take me to Outlook, just like I showed you before. But it also gives me my document library, the default document library, but of course we could create more. I could go to shared with us. This is another automatic feature that it gives us where we can have shared files. I have a OneNote notebook that is created by default, and I can add additional pages. I can add other content as I need, and I can design that site. Oops, I clicked on the wrong one, but either way, I can design the site to include whatever it is that I need it to include. So for me, I think that these are the best things for working together as an organization, having an intranet, making sure that you have a hub that is going to connect all the other individual sites together. And then if it's a team site, it automatically is directly connected with Microsoft Teams. If it's a communication site, you're going to be able to put information on that site, being able to communicate with all your coworkers. It's going to be designed a little bit different and work a little bit different than the actual team site would. So just so you're kind of seeing that they have similarities to them. Now, just to kind of reiterate this a little bit, I'm going to jump back into the intranet site, which is where we kind of started this whole topic. If your organization is a smaller company, you may not need a big elaborate intranet. You might have an intranet hub, a home page, and then if you only have a couple of employees that are in different departments, you might have one or two subsites. You don't always need to have 15 different subsites. It depends on how you want to organize things and how you want to establish the permissions, the rights to who has access to which information. You might have one site just for managers where you're going to put confidential information, but the intranet hub could be available to everybody. You could have a shared team site that everybody in the organization can access, where they're going to have the capabilities of Microsoft Teams and the capabilities, of course, of SharePoint. So plan before you build. We really want to make sure that you start off on the right foot. Not that you can't change things, but some things we delete and recreate. I won't get into all the details of when we might do something like that, but it's easier if you start out on the right foot. So spend a lot of time planning before you ever build. And that's not just with SharePoint, that's with a team as well. So if you go to create a brand new team, make sure that that team isn't already created. Make sure that there isn't a document library that already stores that type of data, both with a SharePoint or a team. We want to make sure that we're not repeating information. We want to have one place to go and not have to worry about, is this the right copy that I'm working with right now? So your handout is going to be a great reference tool for you to be able to go back and get a little bit more detail on what exactly is the difference between a team site, the difference between a communication site. The big part of that is the connectivity direct to Microsoft Teams. So if you create a team site in SharePoint, you have direct connection to a team in Microsoft Teams. If you create a team in Microsoft Teams, you do get a SharePoint site automatically with that. And to be honest with you, I don't think enough people realize that that happens, because not enough people are taking advantage of that connectivity with that SharePoint. So when I was just in Microsoft Teams and I have this, I'll go back to the accounting department one. Well, actually, yeah, I'll go to the accounting department one. If I click on site, it's going to take me directly to that site. So we can have, for our end users, we can have quick, easy access to the information they're going to need to see. They don't have to jump through hoops to get to SharePoint. We can have it as a tab for easy access. And it's an interactive website direct, or SharePoint site directly here in this. So I can sync a calendar. I can come in and add news. When I do click add news, by the way, it is going to take me into SharePoint to update that information, just so you're aware. Now, I'm not really going to fulfill all of that, but just so you're seeing that that's how it kind of works. So use the handout to kind of, even if you've already created a team, you've created a SharePoint site, use this handout to go back and say, okay, did we plan enough, or did we not plan at all? And maybe now we should go back and plan. Let's plan what we're going to do for the future with this, how we're going to maintain things, how often are things going to be updated? Because if these SharePoint sites do not get updated on a regular basis, people are going to lose interest. If it looks the same every single time they come in, why are they coming? So make sure you're updating the events, updating the news, changing things out. If you have a new employee in the department, put a picture, put a bio of them, welcoming them, that kind of a thing. Give people a link to their contact information, making sure that you're kind of regularly having someone update that data. Okay. So Ty, did we get any questions from the group?
I don't see any in the chat. Just double checking here.
Okay.
But we don't. But yeah, if you do have a question you've been hanging on to, feel free to pop that in the chat, or even just unmute, and you're welcome to join us in conversation.
Okay. So Ty, was it clear on the difference between the team sites versus communication sites? Because that's where a lot of people do get confused on which one should I use.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, this was actually educational for me as well, diving a bit more into the SharePoint architecture. So yeah, I think the delineation there was good.
Okay. Because I love being able to go directly to Teams because that's where we are a lot. Teams and Outlook is where we live and breathe. I don't want to have to go to an internet browser to access the SharePoint. I want to be able to do it directly through Teams.
Yeah, exactly. I think,
Yeah.
we're all getting used to working out of Teams as that hub.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of organizations get started in Teams as well, right? They,
Yes.
they start with chat and it builds out a little bit further. So they're already familiar with how it's laid out. So not having to leave the app is, yeah, it's really, really convenient.
Exactly. We want easy to use.
Yes. Yeah, just no questions, but yeah, a couple of really great comments there about reviewing, their SharePoint architecture to see if they can improve it. Yeah,
Good.
that was fantastic. If you do think of any questions later, do feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, other than that, please do check out smartdolphins.com/training. Always adding new content. And yeah, we have more Teams sessions coming up if you want to dive a bit deeper. Yeah, other than that, thank you, Jolene, for today's session.
Absolutely.
That was fantastic.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.